It's 1:30. Given that we have quite a few speakers, I would like to start on time. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar to launch the study report of ADB's work on implications of Industry 4.0 on skills and jobs in ASEAN. I'm Shanti Jagannathan. I'm Principal Education Specialist at ADB. And together with my colleague Samir Katibada, I co-led this study on behalf of ADB. The explosive spread of digital technologies globally under the overall banner of the fourth industrial revolution has been the center of attention for quite some time. So the deep disruptions they are bringing have been ringing some alarms regarding job losses. At the same time, there's also hope that they will bring transformational and beneficial potential to increase productivity, prosperity, and equality. So this study by ADB made an attempt to understand these trends and to assess what they foretell for education and training institutions. It's clear that without adequate preparations, the technological revolution may bring even greater disruptions and loss of livelihoods and so on. So we believe that education and training systems in the broadest sense have an important role to play in preparing the human capital needed. Systems need to be ready to develop the right complement of skill sets and talent pools at a time when many established principles around education are being challenged. For instance, there are no longer degrees for life. People need to continue education and training throughout their working life. Education will no longer be confined within the four walls of institutions, but will be supplemented with online learning even beyond COVID in a much more integral way. Teachers may soon have digital twins as bots who help them address much of the repetitive tasks or routine processes. Big data analytics could give us real-time information on why a particular Stephen or Sarah or Swati is doing badly in math and language, or why Rachel, Robert, or Revati is doing exceedingly well in science. But these are all possibilities at this time, and much more needs to be done to realize that these potential that exist. ADB's portfolio in education operations is dominated by technical and vocational education and training. ADB's support to skills development and jobs constitutes about 37% of our planned investment pipeline of over 6 billion between 2021 and 23, and constitutes the biggest segment. So this study is part of the overall effort to assess the potential of new technologies and how education and training could facilitate this transition to a 4IR workplace. We'll have a presentation today on the study by the economic research firm that's partnered with us. So we've tried to ensure some interesting approaches to the study, research methodologies. To start the ball rolling, I'd like to invite Mr. Ramesh Subramaniam to deliver the opening remarks. He's Director General of Southeast Asia Department, overseeing ADB's cooperation and relationship with the 10 countries in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, and Timor-Leste. He has been a member of various global agenda future councils of the World Economic Forum since 2012, and currently serves as the co-chair of the ASEAN Hub of the World Economic Forum Sustainable Development Investment Partnership. DG Ramesh, over to you.
Thank you so much, Shanti. Many thanks to all of you for joining this webinar. I'm counting 185 people to launch the report of our study on implications of the fourth industrial revolution on skills and jobs in selected ASEAN countries or Southeast Asian countries. When I participated in the annual meeting of the Global Future Councils of the World Economic Forum a few years ago, when Professor Klaus Schwab released his study on the 4IR, and a number of seminars were held. When I came back, had a number of discussions with my colleagues in Southeast Asia Department as well as other parts of ADB. We had been doing a fair bit of work on the digital platforms, particularly with regard to technical and vocational education. So digitization or new solutions per se, they were not new, but certainly 4IR was beginning to kind of have that sensation that it is going to be so important. It's going to be pervading into all spheres of economics as well as social activities. So we started a number of things. I'm very happy that this study that we'll be talking about today has reached this stage of fruition. We produced a report, and equally important, what do we do for our developing member countries that ADB is working with? The proof of the pudding is to take the knowledge and work with our countries in terms of what development solutions that we can bring about for the countries, which is what we are now working on. There was also a parallel focused technical assistance that was done for Indonesia on assessing the impact of fourth industrial revolution. And we've also started a series called PACER. This is driven by the pandemic. It's policy actions for COVID economic recovery that we started. In fact, Fraser Thompson and Jen Lim, who will be presenting the part of the report, have also been involved in some work that we've done across ASEAN countries. Just to share a few perspectives with you, while the impact of new technologies on labor markets has been a topic of concern for businesses, corporations, and governments for some time, COVID-19 has also in parallel accelerated the process of digital transformation and the push towards automation. So it's very timely that we are meeting today to discuss the implications of disruptive technologies on the economy, jobs, and skills, and to take an informed and a timely set of actions to recover, accelerate, and sustain growth in Asia. The 2020 ASEAN Declaration on Human Resources Development for the changing world of work calls for cohesive policies around labor, education, and economic development for quality of jobs and competitiveness, among other things. Human resources for the changing world of work require innovations and use of technology in teaching and learning, not just learning, but lifelong learning and reskilling and upskilling of the workforce. ASEAN has enjoyed pretty stable and high growth rates prior to the pandemic, and we hope the region will have V-shaped recovery from COVID-19. Although there are just so many alphabets that are floating around when we talk about recovery, we do hope it'll be V-shaped recovery. ASEAN is also poised to emerge as a very important player in the digital realm. For instance, at the recent annual meeting of ADB, Finance Minister Sri Mulyani Indrawati of Indonesia shared that Indonesia's digital economy has the potential to reach $124 billion by 2025 from the current $44 billion in 2020. So that's a big, big jump. Digital integration in the region by tapping the digital economy to accelerate intra-regional trade, that's trade within ASEAN, and growth could stimulate GDP uplift of 1 trillion, this is intra-region across different sub-regions of the world by 2025. At the same time, the realization of this potential depends on timely and adequate investments in skills development for the workforce so that corporations and businesses have a steady supply of adequately trained workers and people can access quality jobs in the digital economy, which are quite critical for increasing productivity as well as incomes. The rapid spread of innovations in digital technology could contribute to substantial productivity gains, accompanied by greater economic prosperity and poverty reduction. The ASEAN region, as we all know, has a substantial youth population that can reap the benefits of advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence, robotics, blockchain, and so on, but provided they are suitably qualified and equipped with the right skills. ASEAN can contribute to grow as an internationally competitive manufacturing base by embracing advanced technologies on the one hand, and on the other hand, give rise to new digital occupations, which is certainly going to be a reality as we're all recognizing now. However, disruptive technologies are certainly causing significant volatility in labor markets, requiring the region's workforce to be agile and ready to upskill and reskill. The lack of adequately skilled workers could become definitely a bottleneck in technological transformation, which is going to be a major issue, a serious issue for policymakers as well as us at the Asian Development Bank. We need to work together with all the countries and all partners, whether it's in private sector or public sector, in strengthening the overall skills base. There is already much good work underway with several leading initiatives in ASEAN. For example, the ASEAN Economic Community Blueprint 2025 seeks to build on the previous 2015 blueprint, and it stresses, among other things, the need to build an integrated, competitive, and dynamic ASEAN with enhanced connectivity. Other initiatives include the Master Plan for ASEAN Connectivity 2025 and the E-ASEAN Framework Agreement. Recently, an ASEAN Future Work Council has been established to address the challenges of the workforce of the future, which is a very good development. All of these initiatives that ASEAN has put across bode certainly well for the future. The ADB study we will be discussing today in this webinar was undertaken in 4 countries of ASEAN, namely Cambodia, Indonesia, Philippines, and Viet Nam, covering 8 economic sectors to analyze and assess the readiness to transition to 4IR technologies and workplaces, and also understand what it would mean for building the skill sets needed. Preparing the workforce to tap productive and quality jobs is an important priority in ADB's education sector operations in the region, as Shanti highlighted at the beginning. I am delighted to welcome a great panel of experts that we have. In our work with developing countries, we also look to excellence and innovation among other countries, particularly in Singapore, in various domains. We are super glad to welcome again Michael Fung from Skills Future Singapore. Michael is a very good friend of ADB, and the work of Skills Future is so relevant to our developing member countries in the region. Delighted also to welcome Samuel Ang from Singapore Polytechnic. The future success of learning and training is so critical to unlocking the potential of 4IR. And in this regard, we are particularly delighted to welcome Mr. Till Leopold from the World Economic Forum. The WEF has pioneered the work around the 4th Industrial Revolution, as we know, and its implications for economies and societies and the workforce. And we also have Akiko Sakamoto participating. She'll be sharing her perspectives from ILO. And I should also mention the work done by Fraser Thompson and Jen Lim, who worked with us in this study, as I mentioned, in other studies as well. So that, delighted to be with all of you. Now it's 217. Fantastic to have so many of you join. And I'm going to pass it back to Shanti. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ramesh, for your opening remarks. Lifelong learning, upskilling, reskilling are just going to be so important. Before you turn off the camera, I'm told by the team that this is a time that they would like to take a quick picture. So just a moment before you turn off the camera for a quick picture with everyone.
May we please request all the speakers and panelists to turn on your camera, and at the count of 3, we'll take 2 shots. Thank you. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Petit. Now it's time to turn to the main part of the agenda, which is on the presentation of the study findings. ADB had an excellent partnership with Alpha Beta, an economic research firm in Singapore, for the study. I'd like to really thank the entire team of Alpha Beta, including the country experts who participated in doing the study. The presentation will be made by Fraser Thompson, who is the founder and director of Alpha Beta, and Jen Lim, who is the engagement manager. Fraser leads the digital technology work, and Alpha Beta has undertaken some really interesting work in frontier areas like artificial intelligence and the circular economy. Over to you, Fraser and Jen.
Thank you, Shanti, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to present today. So what we want to do here was just give a very sort of short 20-minute overview of the research, and just hopefully highlight some of the key findings out of that can form the discussion that follows. If we could go to the next slide, please. So in terms of the fourth industrial revolution, there's a range of potential benefits to ASEAN economies. One is clearly productivity, and we saw that the potential increases up to 50% increases labour productivity gains. So this is a huge impact, particularly in an era where we are now, where we talk about 1% productivity gains as being significant. Interestingly, some of the biggest beneficiaries of 4IR are in non-digital sectors such as healthcare. There's benefits for incomes, there's benefits for worker well-being. So we don't talk about it a lot, but workplace injuries can significantly reduce. Also, we see that job satisfaction levels often significantly increase because we remove the more mundane tasks and let workers focus on the areas that are most engaging and most interesting. And interestingly, in jobs, and we'll come to this more in a moment, the initial discussions were very much a doom and gloom picture of 4IR on jobs, and talked about automation of up to 49% of the workforce in some countries. However, our understanding is getting a lot better of this, and we're realizing that actually there could be net job creation that comes from this. But there are some issues with that, which I'll delve into in a second. And finally, workforce participation. Another thing we don't talk about is that 4IR potentially has a really important role to make it easier for people not in the workforce to actually be re-engaged, and that could be digital workers and so forth. So there's a range of potential benefits. If you go to the next page, I guess the challenge we have is that despite this, the research on this has been fairly limited to date. And so what we did is we went into depth into 4 countries in Southeast Asia: Cambodia, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, and we picked 2 key sectors in each country to give an illustrative idea of some of the impacts of 4IR. And to get into the insights, we did a range of things. We did employer surveys in each of these focus sectors. We did large-scale surveys of training institute providers to understand how they're preparing. We analysed job portal data to get real-time information on jobs and skills. And we did a range of stakeholder consultation from government, industry, training institutes, and other key players to understand how they were addressing this agenda. So it's kind of a number of different pieces. If we go to the next slide, I want to talk briefly about the impact of 4IR on jobs, tasks, and skills. And some of the key findings, first of all, on 4IR readiness. Interestingly, the understanding of 4IR is really significantly different across sectors. And one of the concerns is particularly SMEs and MSMEs are some of the ones with the least understanding of 4IR. And that is obviously an issue, partly because of SMEs are such a huge share of total employment and enterprises, but also because there's a real concern with an unequal playing field, that we see certain companies adopt this and start to move ahead, and then you have other firms that don't adopt it and then start to become laggards. In terms of jobs, interestingly, what the analysis showed, there's the potential for 4IR to be net job positive. So rather than being a huge automator of jobs, actually overall, it could stimulate job creation by helping drive productivity and growth faster than it would have been otherwise. But there are some concerns. Concern number one is that sometimes the jobs that are automated are going to be in different areas from the jobs that are going to be created. So how do we support that transition? Second is that there's a gender issue. In some sectors, it's female workers that disproportionately are likely to bear the brunt of automation, given their roles, than it will be for males. And that's just basically because the type of roles that they're doing at the moment are more susceptible to automation. When it comes to tasks, we're going to see a really huge shift from routine to non-routine and analytical work. And then finally, when it comes to skills, the skills vary by sector, but overall we see critical thinking, judgment, and numeracy skills are going to become increasingly important. And there's going to have to be a real shift to much more sort of on-the-job training than we have seen to date. So if we go to the next slide, just to deep dive into some of these findings, this is, we asked firms basically that their understanding of 4IR technologies today. And you see across the sectors and countries there's a bit of variation. In some areas like the garment sector in Cambodia, we see only about a quarter of firms really have any kind of understanding of 4IR. So it's going to be important, that kind of socialization aspect, to help firms understand this. When we go to the next slide, we see that in terms of job creation, the left-hand side is basically the percent of jobs in the sector that could be automated from 4IR. And then on the right-hand side is the green line is basically the jobs that could be created through productivity effects. And as you see, in most cases, the green line is bigger than the red line. So that basically means that overall we could see net job creation. The challenge, as I alluded to earlier, is that a lot of those jobs that get displaced could be very different from the jobs that are created. And so a key policy challenge will be, how do we equip those workers who are displaced and help them transition to some of those new jobs that are going to be created? And that'll require a really significant shift in terms of tasks and skills. If we go to the next slide, there's going to be a really big shift in terms of the type of tasks that have been done. And I won't go into all the numbers here, but basically, if you look at the green, these are all skills that are, or rather task types that are going to be increasing and because of 4IR. And we see across the board, analytical skills will be increasing, perhaps not surprisingly. Non-routine interpersonal skills are going to be increasingly important tasks. So these are kind of the ad hoc requests that are very difficult to automate. For me, recently it's around sort of flight booking changes with odd requests, right? So you often have to, it's not something that can easily be automated. It requires often a person to help navigate that. Then there's non-routine physical, which has a bit more varied. And then you see the last two task areas that are really starting to see significant drop-offs because of 4IR. One is routine interpersonal. So these are the things that, think about a call center or something that could be really automated. And of course, routine physical tasks, which are one of the easiest things for robotics to manage. And increasingly, robotics are advancing at such a rate that they're now able to work in more confined areas and work on more complex and sensitive areas as well. So those routine physical tasks are automating at quite a pace. If we go to the next page, we also look at the importance of skills. And basically, you see a ranking of the importance of skills. And again, I won't go through all the numbers. But the numbers here you see, 1 is the most important in 2030, and 8 is kind of the least important. Across the board, you see it's creative thinking, adaptive learning, complex problem solving, evaluation, judgment, and decision making, which are increasingly become important. What's interesting is that it's not just about digital ICT skills. And this is quite an important thing, is that often we think about that it's just digital ICT skills that we need to equip people with. Actually, 4IR is some of that, but it's a lot more. A lot of the key things around these different types of critical thinking skills that are going to become increasingly important. And we saw this in one of the gaps in the surveys, is that employers are asking for some of these skills. Training institutes are not always providing those kind of skills. So there's a bit of a mismatch between the needs and what's being produced today. If we go to the next slide, I want to then talk a little bit about how are training institutes responding to this. And going on again to the next slide, thank you. There's both sort of some positive aspects and some areas requiring attention. So first of all, in terms of the positive aspects, many training institutions feel that they're pretty well equipped for 4IR, although they do request some more support for capacity building and funding. Training institutions report they engage pretty regularly with employers on skills. And generally, there's pretty strong alignment between training institutions and employers on what skills are actually needed. So these are all very positive. But there's some gaps. Gap number 1 is around the curriculum. Training institutes are not updating their curriculum fast enough to keep pace with the changes that are happening. And we went into quite a bit of depth in this. And in some countries, it can take up to 1.5 years to make these changes because of various bottlenecks in the approaches. And so I think one key area of focus will be, how do we try to make that a more fluid concept to make sure that curriculums are more flexible to update to these changing needs. Second, generally a lower focus on workplace training than theoretical training. And so there'll be an importance of how do we make that shift happen. Third, when we look at the Training Institute's courses, the actual 4IR technology application in the delivery of those courses is a bit mixed. So they may be talking about 4IR, but the technologies they're using to actually instruct students are not always the latest ones. When it comes to the kind of advice to students, most are providing general career advice, but much fewer are providing real-time information on job market conditions, such as wages and job prospects. And this, we think, will become increasingly important given the dynamism in this sector. Training institutes are also more optimistic about graduates' preparedness for work than employers. And there's a real mismatch in some sectors that training institutes feel like actually they're graduates of the right kind of quality, but you ask employers and they see a real drop-off. And we believe bridging that gap is going to be really important going forward. And finally, there is some challenges in filling student programs because of this lack of knowledge of their courses and their ability to differentiate. So just going on to a couple of those. So what I talked about the curriculums before, and also talked about the engagement with employers. And you see most actually training institutes say they engage relatively frequently. So you see in the case of Indonesia, Philippines, and Viet Nam, over roughly about 3/4 respond that they either engage with employers several times a year or monthly or even more frequently. So that seems pretty good. But there are challenges, obviously, in terms of the content of that. If we go to the next slide, we see that in terms of the types of training that's done, still more of the training seems to be orientated towards theoretical training and less on terms of workplace-based training. And a lot of the evidence, particularly from Europe, suggests that workplace-based training can be some of the most important for preparing workers for the kind of things they're going to need in the actual workplace. So how do we rethink that mix of how they're spending their time is going to be crucial. If we go to the next slide, we see that in terms of the kind of tools that they're using to deliver those courses, there's a bit of a gap. On the right-hand side, you see that many are using online self-learning modules, but then increasingly things like simulators or virtual learning platforms, which are becoming increasingly popular, have much more limited usage. And then particularly given the fact that with COVID, this is going to become more and more challenging to do workplace training, some of these online platforms and virtual learning are going to become really, really crucial. If we go to the next page, this is this key point that I made earlier, saying that we see a mismatch between what training institutes think about the quality of the students that they're preparing versus what employers do. And just to give you an example of that, so you see in the case of Cambodia on the left-hand side, we asked training institutions, are your graduates adequately prepared for entry-level positions? And 63% say yes, but only 16% of employers agree. So that's a really sizable gap that we see. Similarly, when we come to the question of do they have the appropriate job-specific skills, 3/4 of training institutions say yes, but only 13% of employers agree. So bridging that gap is going to become really, really important. And a lot of the recommendations we look at in this is how to do that effectively. If we go to the next slide, thank you. So with that, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Genevieve, and she'll take us through a bit of analysis of the policy environment and some of the priorities that we've suggested from this report.
Thank you very much, Fraser. So when we looked at the policy environments of the three different countries, apologies for the typo there, we looked at the range of policies that countries already have in trying to address the kinds of 4IR skills that will be required by workers. And a few of these policies turned out to be really some positive interventions that we're seeing right now. So, for example, Indonesia has a really strong national roadmap for 4IR adoption through its Making Indonesia 4.0 strategy. And there is also a range of incentives in the Philippines for student apprenticeships. Now, in terms of policies that help to create new flexible qualification pathways, we also noticed that Vietnam in particular really exhibits a very strong STEM focus on curriculums. And there was really this emphasis on really starting from primary education to look into STEM skills. And when it comes to policies to help to build inclusiveness, to extend 4IR benefits, and we found that this was particularly an important area of policy, given that there is a notion that technology's benefits were only received by a segment of the population. We also noted some positive policies, such as financial support that was rendered in the form of TVET scholarships that were awarded to low-income students in Cambodia, and also employability programs for low-income groups in Indonesia. Now, across these different policy areas, we also saw that there were several areas for improvement. In the sense, in relation to really stimulating 4IR adoption, we thought that there could be some further work done on policies that really help to bridge 4IR technology adoption by firms to the kinds of skills that workers will require. And I'll talk a bit more about some of the recommendations that we have proposed based on international best practices. Now, in the area of creating new flexible qualification pathways, we felt that there was a lack of really strong lifelong learning models across the country studied, and educational curriculums, even though they embedded a strong STEM element, they actually could be more agile in response to industry needs. And in relation to the last policy area of building inclusiveness, we also noted that across the different Southeast Asian countries, there is an emerging segment of gig economy workers that are leveraging new technologies, and that more work could be done in terms of boosting the social protection. And at the same time, we noticed that there were several challenges faced in the implementation of policies across the countries today. And the first was around the clarity and robustness of plans. With the exception of Indonesia, we noticed that 4IR strategies still do not have a coherent strategy across different countries, in the sense that there isn't a lead government agency that really champions this strategy across multiple ministries and across with industry and the training sector as well. The second dimension is around the strength of coordination, and it seems that in most of the countries that we studied, there still doesn't appear to be one shared roadmap with industry and across different governance levels, particularly in larger countries like Indonesia and the Philippines. And in the third area, which is where we looked at the strength of financing and incentives, we also noted that investment levels in R&D were relatively low in the Southeast Asian country, the four Southeast Asian countries in comparison with global leaders, and that incentives for employers and workers to actually invest in skills development was still relatively weak. And in particular, we noted that formal workplace training rates were actually still really low across the countries. And some of the key policy priorities that we looked at across the countries really focus on some of these gaps that we looked at. And we have 6 key recommendations. The first recommendation is around developing sector-specific 4IR adoption roadmaps. And one positive best practice that we've seen is in Singapore, where industry transformation maps actually chart technology adoption needs for each country. And they don't just end at the kinds of technologies that firms need to implement in their operations, but these maps also include the kinds of skills that are required to adopt, to support this adoption and the training options for it. The second recommendation is around developing a series of industry-led TVET programs for skills. And we see some positive practices by civil society actors in India, as well as by private sector corporations, where industry boot camps really focusing on employability skills are actually run for both entry-level and mid-career workers. The third recommendation is around implementing an incentive scheme for firms to train their workers. And here, there are positive policy practices from the Singapore government, which actually subsidizes training cost fees. And these subsidies are actually higher for training courses that are accredited by the government or recognized to have the kinds of future skills required as technology evolves. The fourth recommendation is around developing a series of industry-led TVET programs for skills. And we see some positive practices by civil society actors in India, as well as by private sector corporations, where industry boot camps really focusing on employability skills are actually run for both entry-level and mid-career workers. The fifth recommendation is around implementing an incentive scheme for firms to train their workers. And here, again, there are positive policy practices from the Singapore government, which actually subsidizes training costs fees. And these subsidies are actually higher for training courses that are accredited by the government or recognized to have the kinds of future skills required as technology evolves. The fourth is around providing support for training institutes, and in particular to really get them to adopt 4IR technologies in the way they deliver their training. The fifth is around strengthening quality assurance mechanisms for training institutions. And there are several ways in which this can be done. For example, in countries like Austria, training institutions are required to actually survey participants of the training program, including the employers that send workers to their training programs, of whether these specific training courses are actually in demand. And the last recommendation is around strengthening social protection measures in the context of 4IR. So I'd just like to end off with a few different takeaways. The first is that, as Fraser mentioned earlier, with the right kind of policy settings in place, 4IR technologies actually have the potential to create rather than to take away jobs. The second is that training would actually need to focus on key skills required. And these are not just about digital or ICT skills. These are actually soft skills like evaluation, judgment, and even numeracy skills. The third is that the majority of such training will need to take place through both informal on-the-job learning, especially as technologies continue to evolve, and through longer formal training. The fourth is that training institutions will need to apply 4IR technologies in their training delivery in order to really get students really familiar with these technologies. And there's a lot more scope that this could take place in the 4 countries. And the final takeaway is that government policy will need to focus on developing clearer national frameworks that not just focus on 4IR adoption, but also skilling. And as part of this, strengthen incentives for skills development. And with that, I'd just like to end off this presentation. Thank you so much for your attention, and really keen to hear any questions or feedback that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jen and Fraser, for this comprehensive presentation on the study findings. I would encourage people to dig, if you want to dig deeper. There are these reports are online. You can download them and read them at your convenience. It's now time to hear the experts. We are happy that leading experts have agreed to join this webinar to respond to some of the study findings and also give their insights on next steps and further work. I'd now like to invite Dr. Michael Fung, who is the Deputy Chief Executive, Chief Human Resource Officer, and Chief Data Officer at Skills Future Singapore. Michael is also an adjunct senior fellow at Singapore University of Technology and Design. As Ramesh mentioned, he's a great friend of ADB and has joined discussions in the past. He brings an authentic voice on the topic with deep experience on the ground with both industry and training providers with the future lens. So we're delighted to have you, Michael. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Shanti. Let me first thank ADB for initiating this conference, this webinar. I think it's a very timely, important topic, and I thank Brajesh, Shanti, and the ADB team for the invitation and the opportunity. We're very pleased for Skills Future to co-host this webinar on Industry 4.0. And the Skills Future Singapore, the organization that I represent, we are an agency under the Ministry of Education. We set up the policies and we provide funding for workforce training and promotion of lifelong learning across all segments of our population and across all our various industries. As Ramesh had shared with us earlier, we live in a world where disruptions are occurring at increasing frequency. And these disruptions will bring about impact that will become more and more widespread. And I think we have really felt the effects of this last year as well. And over the last 5 to 10 years or so, we've seen the impact of technological disruptions due to 4IR causing significant changes in our industry segments as well as our labor markets. And this had indeed being further exacerbated by COVID-19 since 2020. And I would agree with Fraser that 4IR will bring not just job displacements and jobs lost, but there will be jobs gain as well. And it's very likely that there will be net positive effects on the labor market, but only if we are able to address some of the structural rigidities in our economies and our societies. So as we look at the future of work, I think it's become increasingly clear to us that enterprises have to pivot and transform. They have to adopt technology, automate and digitalize their businesses, build the relevant skills and agility, and have a mindset that embraces change. And our employees and our workforce would also have to respond to these changes in jobs and job tasks, to reskill, to upskill, and multi-skill themselves, particularly in emerging and digital skills areas. And we would have to encourage our workforce to embrace change as a constant in the future of work beyond 4IR and beyond COVID. As governments and policymakers, we would have to take an adaptive and pragmatic policy posture in helping enterprises and workforce to adapt to these disruptions. In the context of Singapore, we had examined the impact of digitalization, technology, and 4IR across all our major industry sectors. And we have done this through our industry transformation program that was first announced in 2016 that led to the production of 23 industry transformation maps, each one customized to the specific industry's context and the needs. Along with that, we have defined a set of initiatives that will help the industry sector to thrive and grow, as well as define the skills frameworks on identifying what are the critical skills to equip our workforce with, including digital skills, to support the transformation of our companies and industries in the face of 4IR. One of the rigidities of our traditional education and training systems is that it has not been designed to meet rapidly changing skills needs of our workforce. And as we think about the kinds of disruptions that we've been seeing, it is clear that this traditional model will need to evolve to one that is much more agile, much more flexible, and one that's non-linear, but with multiple pathways that individuals can come into the system, leave the system, and come back to the system as and when they need it throughout their lifetimes of careers. As we look at the future work, the future education, we would need a system that is not just front-loaded, but one that's lifelong learning in nature. And we have to integrate work and study much more closely so that our graduates will have work-ready skills as they come out into the workforce. And we have to emphasize the acquisition of priority and emerging skills, including technological skills, but also the soft skills that would allow our workforce to adapt to change. And we have to empower our individuals, our population, to take ownership of their learning journey. And this was what we attempted to do when we announced the Skills Future movement in 2015, and we've been working towards a system that's much more flexible and agile in nature. And Skills Future as a movement is a national skills strategy to develop an integrated and high-quality education and training system, one that would respond to the evolving needs of the economy and society. Now, in developing such a lifelong learning system, we must make sure that the system is accessible to various population segments and to various industry segments as well. And we have to deliver such education and training in a range of different ways. Some of them in structured settings like in classrooms, some of which will be delivered through workplace-based learning. And training episodes and courses would have to be modular and bite-sized in design and to be relevant and tap on prior experience of learners. And we would have to leverage on educational technology to make the training accessible, particularly when remote learning needs to happen, be it due to distances or due to public safety and health considerations. We also have to make the access to the lifelong learning system affordable. We have to take an inclusive approach and make special accommodations for disadvantaged groups, as well as for smaller companies, perhaps our micro and small medium enterprises as well, so that we're able to uplift and upskill everyone across the population, across our industries. What we are really trying to do is to aim to provide the equivalent of affordable universal access to a system of lifelong education and training. And under the Skills Future movement, we've provided a range of financial support, including initiatives such as the Skills Future Credit for individuals, Skills Future Enterprise Credit for companies, and these are over and above course fee grants, wage support, training allowance, and other forms of financial support that we provide. To date, we support something in the range of 20,000 courses, and these courses include domains such as emerging and digital skills, as well as basic digital literacy. And this has enabled us to empower our stakeholders to make better training decisions, using our skills frameworks, using job skills insights that we produce, close the information gap on what are the skills needs needed by industry now and needed in the near future. We also have to ensure that the training is relevant to industry, and this is carried out through various targeted upskilling programs and frequently done in collaboration with the industry. We also capitalize on the downtime due to COVID-19 to support our enterprises and workers to build deeper skills and to prepare themselves as the economy recovers. Through a multi-stakeholder approach involving our universities, polytechnics, private training providers, leading companies, our unions, and other government agencies, we built a system that has helped us to adapt and respond to disruptions. I want to congratulate ADB on your publication of the Industry 4.0 study and the important analysis and insights on Industry 4.0 related developments for Southeast Asia, in particular Cambodia, Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. And Singapore has been very much engaged with ADB and regional countries in the skills development agenda. Our skills standards and skills qualification frameworks have been extended to regional countries through efforts by our institutes of higher learning, by our training providers. So for example, in Cambodia, there is in the industry transformation map for textile and apparel industry, our companies have been involved. In Indonesia, we are engaging in discussions around digital skills development and certification. In the Philippines, I'm happy to share that the Philippines has developed their version of skills frameworks to power growth in sectors such as IT, BPO, and there are a range of skills provided, skills training provided by Singapore entities in Vietnam as well. Now, specific to Industry 4.0, we also have the Singapore Smart Industry Readiness Index, and that's been used by a number of regional countries. In October last year, we announced a collaboration with ADB around the Global Technology Innovation Village, and this was a collaboration between Singapore Poly and ADB. So these are all very relevant and useful efforts to extend our engagement to the region and beyond. And I look forward to further opportunities to be able to collaborate with ADB and various ASEAN countries to build a strong and competitive workforce for the region to help our economies of society navigate the challenges and opportunities brought about by disruptions. And we look forward to seeing how to follow up on potential for establishing these relationships with our education and training institutions from Singapore and extend the knowledge and experience to other countries. And together we can work towards strengthening our labor markets, our skills ecosystems, and our economies as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing in a short duration all the excellent work that's going on in Singapore and also the efforts that are being made to share this experience with other countries in the region. And we definitely really appreciate the collaborations with ADB in taking some of this to our developing member countries' work, like you mentioned, Cambodia. Thank you so much. Next up is Samuel Ang, who is at the Singapore Polytechnic and is the chairman of Polate, a startup incubator and accelerator. He's also director for the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. He's been partnering with ADB on curriculum planning and development of innovation ecosystems, incorporating technologies such as Industry 4.0. ADB is also running a 6-part webinar series on 4IR with Singapore Poly. Thank you for joining us today. Sam, over to you.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Shanti and Brajesh and Shanti and the ADB team for having me today. Let me just quickly bring up my slides. Yes, good afternoon. Today, I'd like to share a little bit about very much in the area of skill IR 4.0, this more from a Singapore experience. One of the key things that actually came up in 2018 was a survey by the Oxford Economics and Cisco, whereby the survey actually found that by 2028, for the same amount of output, there's expected to have actually 28 million fewer workers that's actually needed for the same output. And this is for the ASEAN 6, as highlighted here. So of course, the outcome would actually be expected that you may have actually displaced workers, versus if you basically look at it positively, there are actually 28 million people that potentially could be put into more valuable outcomes. And I think one of the things that Brajesh mentioned earlier on was in another seminar was actually mismatch. So the imperative is to be able to match a lot of these potentially displaced workforce with the correct matching of skill sets, and to be able to then contribute to the enhanced GDP output. Of particular interest in this survey was that Singapore was looking at 21% versus actually the rest of the region, which basically means that we're actually looking at even much stronger drive towards making sure that the training is actually done for Singapore. With that, in 2016, Singapore actually went on and developed a skill future framework to prepare Singaporeans for the future. I think Michael has actually shared very much about this. And very briefly, we're actually looking at 23 industry roadmaps, transformation maps, in many, many different areas like logistics, energy, aerospace, and so on and so forth. And if you actually had a chance to look at any of the books, they're actually very thick books and very detailed in terms of how you actually would look at transforming each and every industry. If you basically look at the key stakeholders in this transformation, you're actually looking at helping individuals to make well-informed choices and making available education. Yeah, looking at providing an integrated and high-quality system of education and training provided through the educational institutions in Singapore, as well as many of the other agencies. And of course, to also engage with employers to provide recognition and career development based on skill and mastery. So collectively, you're actually looking at trying to foster a culture that actually supports and celebrate not just a singular event of learning, but literally a lifelong learning mentality. So one of the things that when we actually went on this particular journey was that most of the companies basically felt, oh, this is really something that's actually too difficult for us. And it is something which they have a lot of fear and trepidation. So in terms of being able to go on this journey, one of the key things is that we've actually looked at creating clinics, events, learning journeys, to be able to demystify a lot of the areas about I 4.0. It is frankly not a very fearful journey, and it can actually be broken up into an incremental journey, whereby a company, in fact, most companies in Singapore would typically be at the I 2.0 level, and obviously we want to bring them towards the I 4.0. So that particular journey is whereby we are actually looking at being able to bring them from an I 2.0 to 2.5 to 3.0 and 4.0 thereafter. So with that, a lot of companies actually do go through this learning journey, and in fact, there are programs where the company representatives actually literally get their hands dirty and even get to really get hands-on to be able to even program a robot. They then take this back and in terms of a change mindset. The next thing with that change mindset and engagement is where the provision of consultancy service comes in to then first and foremost to identify exactly where they are in this I 4.0 journey. And I think Michael has shared a little bit about the Siri platform, which I'll explain a little bit more a little bit later. And once they identify where they are, it's almost like a GPS where they are. Then, of course, the destination is I 4.0. Then it becomes a lot easier to identify what are the necessary steps towards meeting the destination. So with that, the next step would then to be able to make available training. And right now, there's of course many training courses that are actually supported by SkillsFuture Singapore, and this is actually leveraging on this the SkillsFuture framework for the 23 different industries. And then, of course, the very important thing after the development of the skill sets is whereby you're actually looking at being able to create a sustainable environment for each company, whereby the behaviors of the company is actually changed. Okay. Okay, so if you basically look at, that's actually more from the journey itself. Right now, if you basically look at from an individual standpoint, one of the key objectives is then, when we zoom down to the individual, is to be able to change digitally awkward individuals towards a digitally skilled worker through the process of mindset change, skill set change, and behavioral change. With that, there's actually curated different levels of training, as you can see, whereby you're actually looking at acquisition of basic digital competences, and then thereafter application within the workplace. And then after that, even being able to look further down, whereby you're looking at the analysis of even future trends. And you can see that with this, take for example, under advanced manufacturing, there's actually a whole set of programs that's actually been lined up for to be able to train a digitally skilled worker. I'd like to actually share now an example of a case study, a very successful case study and this is actually from Shell, Singapore. Initially, they had a plant that was actually totally manual. And of course, one of the key things as they were basically moving to another plot factory in Singapore, one of the key things was to be able to bring it to almost full automation. And one of the key things that came out of this whole exercise was that there was a six-fold improvement in terms of productivity over the previous plant, and a 50% increase in capacity. And one of the things that also came out from this is that from the staff that is actually from this plant, the company was actually in a very good position to be able to pay more the good workers, but at the same point in time, with a prerequisite that they continue to on this digital learning journey to continually upgrade themselves. So one of the key things that is very important in this whole paradigm is where you're looking to build an ecosystem. I think just now Fraser actually shared that it's not just the training, it's not just the learning. It's actually really domain-based learning and engagement that's actually most important. This is why the building the ecosystem is actually very important, whereby, of course, looking at building a comprehensive qualification program to build a pool of skilled labor. And this is not just in terms of the training itself, but also for industry recognized certifications, whereby employers would be more than happy to pay a trained individual and fully certified individual more to be able to get the job done, as well as, of course, very much more a peace of mind that the trained individual is actually really knows and has been certified in terms of what they actually do. The next thing is to be able to provide also a flexible test bed. This is where facilities have been set up, whereby, as an example, a, a digital chemical plant that a student could actually be trained to bring a whole plant up and down through the use of sensors and actuators and bring it up and down a few times a day. This type of learning is definitely not available in a real life operating plant. And this is actually something that's actually very, very critical, again, to be able to make learning very relevant to participants. The last item, which is actually very important, is also to be able to build a community of practice, a knowledge community where expertise is actually being shared. And this actually goes beyond the basic training. This goes beyond the basic hands-on, whereby a lot of times where you basically look at examples like in Germany, they have master craftsmen who go way, way beyond what is actually certified and learned. This is where a community of practice becomes very, very important in terms of sharing of these competencies. With this, I'd just like to share with you an example of the framework for the energy and chemical sector. This is just one example of many examples that SkillsFuture has actually put together, which you can see the many squares here covering 53 different jobs. And actually, there are 95 different technical skills and competencies. Now, what this also means is that, take, for example, an assistant technician, laboratory technician, or a maintenance technician can see in this pathway very clearly what is actually needed for them to move either vertically or even horizontally, and the different skill sets and the certifications that's actually required. And if you basically look at it, even in the different domains in a chemical and energy environment. So this is something which is already currently available and has been developed by SkillsFuture. Lastly, I'd just like to bring you to this Advanced Manufacturing Index, jointly launched by Singapore ADB as well as the World Economic Forum, whereby the Smart Industry Readiness Index assesses different aspects of a company's process, technology, and even organizational readiness and management structures to make an assessment where the company actually stands in terms of IR 4.0. I think this is actually a very useful and important tool whereby it helps a company know where it stands, and therefore, as like a GPS, is able to bring the through a lot of the frameworks that have actually been developed to then step the company forward step by step towards IA 4.0 outcome. So in a quick summary, the Siri would actually be a very important tool for baselining where the company is, and this is where typically we will actually start the learning journey. Of course, as a prerequisite, as I mentioned earlier on, to be able to demystify what I 4.0 really is, because we do really see that a lot of companies, when you basically throw words like advanced manufacturing, I 4.0, a lot of times they basically would tend to turn off and say, no, this is something that's actually too much for me. So after the demystification, we will then work with them on the benchmarking and baselining where they are, and then handhold them through the progression from where they are, example, I 2.0 to 2.5, and thereafter to I 4.0. Very importantly, as part of this journey, it is important that the companies have provided with offerings and capabilities to be able to see, touch, and more importantly, relate to this I 4.0 journey. This helps them very much in terms of being able to develop and build a comfort, and in fact, and thereafter to be able to engage very much more in this journey. One of the aspects here is to then to be able to build also modular building blocks, again, where the companies can incrementally step as they basically build their competencies and capabilities in this journey. So with this, the engagement model where I think I just shared earlier on, in terms of the frameworks for companies, the frameworks for the individuals, the availability of being able to benchmark where they are at this point in time, and then where they actually want to go further down the road. And of course, the access to the facilities and resources to be able to take them on this journey. With that, thank you very much. And if like to hear if there's any feedback or any feedback or any questions anyone might have. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sam. That was a very fascinating presentation, and especially tools like Siri and all can help countries to benchmark and to move towards a certain direction in a systematic and structured way. Thank you so much for sharing very concrete examples of how this can be done. This, I'm sure, will lead to some questions down the line. Thank you very much. I'd now like to welcome Mr. Till Leopold, who is Head of Frontier Insights at the World Economic Forum Center for the New Economy and Society. He's been engaging with the future of work, education skills, gender parity, and economic and social policies related to the Fourth Industrial Revolution. We know that World Economic Forum has been championing the work around 4IR globally, and we are delighted to have Till here to round off this segment of experts' views and insights before we open up for discussions. Please keep putting your questions in the chat box, and if you'd like to address a query to a specific individual, please put that as well. But before that, let me invite Mr. Till Leopold. Over to you, Till.
Thank you very much, Shanti. And let me just start by congratulating the authors of the study. I think it's a really great and comprehensive piece of research, and it's really aligned with a lot of the things that we're also seeing at the World Economic Forum. I think what we've seen over the past year is essentially this double disruption. So of course, we have seen COVID-19 and the impact of COVID on the global labor market and the global economy. But COVID has then also really accelerated the fourth industrial revolution. So from some of the data that we've seen at the forum, COVID has led to more than 80% of companies globally to scaling remote work, more than 80% accelerating their investment in digitization, and more than half accelerating their investment in automation. And so I think what we're seeing from this sort of double disruption emerging, the implication is that I think we're looking at quite a different sort of agenda for the fourth industrial revolution and for the future of work than we would have just a year ago. So it's clear that questions of job quality, of health and safety and well-being are much more central perhaps to the agenda rather than just sort of the question of automation itself. But also there's so many additional dimensions here around sort of the structure of organizations, the culture of organizations. Just think of remote work and all the implications for offices, for supply chains, and so on. We are also very aligned at the World Economic Forum with the overall finding of the study that the jobs outlook of the fourth industrial revolution is likely net positive. And really the question is that the skills profiles of the new jobs that are emerging is quite different from the jobs that will be going away. And so this question of investment in skills is sort of the absolutely key one to get this right. And when we look at this, it's important, the sort of the challenge here is that we're looking at the same time at essentially new markets and new sectors that are emerging, but then of course also new jobs. And so you have this interplay where you have kind of interesting new kinds of jobs actually coming up. But they are spread across different industries, across different sectors, and then the economy itself is transforming as the jobs are also changing. What you see on the slide here is from our data and some collaboration with LinkedIn on sort of really what are some of the clusters of job families that are emerging. And perhaps the first thing to see is that it is not sort of all about sort of data and AI and robots. There's actually a lot of jobs that are coming up in demand globally and essentially in every region of the world around content and sales and people and culture and marketing and so on, as well as really big opportunities in the care economy and in the green economy that sort of cut across all of this in interesting ways. When we look at the sort of potential to actually move people into these jobs from jobs that are declining, we need to keep in mind both the absolute growth rate of these jobs, and there, as you can see on the slide here, sort of data and AI are certainly, those are the fastest growing jobs, but you also need to keep in mind the absolute number of sort of opportunities of jobs that will actually be emerging here. And again, we see that, for example, jobs in sales, marketing, and content are also growing very fast, though not as dramatically as perhaps some of these more STEM-based jobs, but there is actually in the absolute a lot more numbers of jobs coming up in those areas. And I also would really like to amplify what Fraser and Jen shared earlier in the presentation around this question of the inclusivity of what these jobs actually are. And so, for example, if you do look at the gender dimension, it is clear that today the share of women, for example, in some of these jobs of tomorrow that are coming up is highly unequal, and this is something that requires targeted attention. At the World Economic Forum, we are looking at all of these things under an umbrella initiative, as we call it, that we call the Reskilling Revolution platform, with the goal to providing 1 billion people with better jobs, better education, and better skills by 2030. It's an open platform. We're inviting collaboration with a wide range of actors and stakeholders. So in this context, would really like to thank also our partners at Skills Future and already working with us on this. Looking forward to engaging even more with the ADB in the future, and everybody here on the webinar. Please do feel free to also connect and look at that. What we're finding in terms of just the size of the challenge, and so this is sort of perhaps the hard news, is that we find that something like 50% of all employees globally will need some form of reskilling by 2025 as a result of the fourth industrial revolution and this double disruption from both 4IR and COVID. And that also even in those jobs that are sort of very much not going away, skills are changing fast, and something like 40% of the core skills of any job essentially will be changing over the next 5 years. The good news is, and I'll start from a macroeconomic perspective, is that we've seen, and this is some modeling we've done recently with PwC, that the potential of a wide-scale investment in upskilling has the potential to boost global GDP by something like 6.5 trillion over that same period to 2030. And so when you sort of try to model that, the interesting thing is not just to look at the absolute size, but also of how it might play out. So you see on the slide here, you see these two scenarios that we've actually looked at, an accelerated scenario, which actually gives a higher return, and a sort of a baseline scenario. The key difference here is just essentially what we do right now. So, really a consolidated effort in investing in a comprehensive upskilling agenda, also as part of sort of the recovery thinking from the economic shock of COVID, can reap these massive benefits and should be absolutely central to everything we're talking about. And another good piece of news around this is that we're actually seeing that it does seem to be quite feasible to actually mobilize the private sector and other actors around such a reskilling revolution. So we find that something like 2 out of 3 employees actually expect that they could see a positive return in investing in the upskilling of their own workforce within a year. So essentially, in terms of the increased productivity and so on, this sort of investment might pay for itself in under a year. And we also know that it is sort of, and it's important to get more precise on that, just on the sort of the scale of the upskilling that is actually required. So for example, as you can see on the slide, in terms of some of these roles, we estimate it might take sort of 1 to 2 months of full-time training. This is full-time training to really prepare people for some of these emerging jobs of tomorrow in the people and culture and sales roles, compared to 4 to 5 months in cloud computing and engineering. But essentially, it does require, of course, a really consolidated effort, but it is doable. And very importantly as well, and many of my fellow panelists mentioned this already, there is this virtuous cycle between investment and upskilling and really creating good jobs and good work. And of course, the productivity improvements that are possible through investment in upskilling really can enable this kind of comprehensive movement to good work in the fourth industrial revolution. And so this is something that absolutely is important also to keep in mind. I think also already Fraser and Jen shared around the kinds of skills that we're seeing that emerging. This is also something that at the World Economic Forum, we're finding very similar results globally, that it is, on the one hand, yes, of course, some of these technology skills, knowing how to work with technology, that will be very crucial over the next 10 years. But it is at the same time also these interpersonal skills and creative problem solving and so on. And it is really this combination of skills that I think can prepare people for the future. So just to give you a sense of what we are seeing also for the region, I think the study also mentions around the fact that actually one common challenge in many countries, not just in ASEAN certainly, is that actually both employers, training institutions, individuals are actually not so quite sure which skills to focus on and what and where to focus attention. And I think things such as the study, such as all the rich sharing by the experts on the panel here today, can hopefully help to really sort of take away some of that fear and help people orient themselves. And again, in terms of the sort of the size, the absolute size of learning that is required. So I'm giving the example of Indonesia here on the slide, but so according to estimates, again, it is feasible, even though we are finding that nearly sort of 30% of workers might require sort of the equivalent of a full-time year of reskilling to really reap the benefits of this job creation in the fourth industrial revolution. I would like to really amplify some of the recommendations that have already been made by my fellow panelists. I think the findings of the study itself are very comprehensive, and we heard a lot of good recommendations, but I would just really like to pick out and amplify a few. The first one is around this question of lifelong learning and upskilling. And it really is a question of culture building, essentially. So it's not just a technical challenge, it requires many stakeholders, it requires mindset change, culture change, and so many ministries, agencies, civil society organizations, other stakeholders have a role to play here. The second one is around the focus on really proactive redeployment and reemployment, shifting people from some of these declining sectors to the jobs of tomorrow. And here, we've heard a lot already about these employment pathways, things such as industry transformation maps and so on, to actually understand what these transition paths might look like, but then to also really build a rich sort of ecosystem of collaboration around that across industries, across sectors. The third recommendation I want to amplify is around innovative skills funding models. And I think we've heard a lot of really interesting recommendations here from Michael and from Skills Future, things such as these individual learning accounts and other such mechanisms that really enable people to actually take advantage of that in a concrete way. And lastly, and I think this is also the basis of a lot of the data that has been shared by with you in the webinar today, there is this opportunity to become much more precise around skills anticipation and job market insight through a lot of this kind of real time labor market data that is now available through online platforms and others. And there's really a rich opportunity here for much more systematic public-private collaboration to sort of bring such data really into also the national conversations and into planning at a very concrete level. And to enable all of this, there's a couple of factors that sort of would really help creating such a system and putting it in place. The first one is really aligning much more nationally, regionally, globally on definitions of skills and common national skills taxonomies, and just having a common language that we all speak. A second dimension is around the recognition and certification of such skills, so to enable people to really take advantage of this. So things such as micro-credentials and so on. And it is clear that doing this will require, and I think this is sort of one of the key messages that I would really like to finish with, that this requires a lot of collaboration. It requires regional collaboration. It requires collaboration between stakeholders. And so in the spirit of that collaboration, I would just really like to thank the panel today, and the World Economic Forum looks forward working with the ADB and with all the other stakeholders here on further on this agenda. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Till, for very thought-provoking suggestions that complement the recommendations and insights from other panelists. So you rounded it off very well with a great selection of things to think about. It's time for Q&A. We are already a little bit behind time, so you're not going to have as much time. So we've been responding to the questions in the Q&A segment. But before we pose some questions back to the panelists, I'd like to welcome Akiko Sakamoto, a Skills and Employability Specialist at ILO. ILO has had this centenary declaration on the future of work and also been very much engaged on this topic. So Akiko, a very short intervention from you, please.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Shanti, and then also, an organizer for giving ILO opportunity to comment. It's been, and also congratulations for the launch of this very timely study, and then great presentations, and then also really appreciated all the insights and experience sharing by the panelists. So thank you very much again. So this topic, as you said, is also a major interest and concern for the ILO's work on skills in Tibet. As also the previous speaker already mentioned that the ILO 4.0 is a major driving force in reshaping the way we do business, the way we engage work, and then that's defining the skills requirements. So what it really indicates is that even more, the greater needs to bring the education training sector on one hand, and then the world work together. So, ILO have been working on this for many years, but we are really stepping up now our efforts to really to assist our ILO member states and a partner to really strengthen to be effectively work with the industries. And that's really the major work that we have been doing. And then by doing so that we are really promoting a sectoral approach. As of the Fraser's presentation showed that the challenges and opportunity that IR 4.0 brings is very different from one sector to another. And then here, I think we emphasize the importance of really having a deep dialogue and then coming up with a sector-specific solutions and action together with the sector stakeholders. So that's the approach we are working. And then here we assist the member states to really consider what is the effective institutional mechanism to engage the industry. We also work together with partners on assessing a few current and future skill needs, and especially with a view to support this reskilling and upskilling and lifelong learning efforts. And now also we are also looking at the whole system of, it's also the shared interest of many of you here, including at Till that just mentioned from the World Economic Forum, about how to really look at improve the strategies and then system to really support reskilling and upskilling and then the lifelong learning. So that's the area we're working on. But one thing that I really want to stress is that what we are really emphasizing is that to look at the importance of both working in demand side and the supply side of the skill at the same time. I mean, because even though we really work hard in improving the Tibet readiness to respond and the sales opportunity provided by the Industry 4.0, at the end, if there is not sufficient jobs out there which make a best use of these upgraded skills, there's really a very limited chance that this investment, our effort in investing in skills will lead to better employment and then contributing to the stronger business performance and so on. So it's really important and so therefore our approach is that we facilitate the dialogue with stakeholders in a way that to promote the industry upgrading, and then also in the leading towards a quality job creation, and then trying to see that our effort in the skill development in order to support that. So I think that this is a kind of the main idea, one of the key ideas that actually underlines my understanding the Singapore industry transformation map in Athol. So I really wanted to emphasize that skills really need to really contribute to the quality job the creation at the same time. I say that particularly so that, as you know, that we are very mindful in Southeast Asia, many countries, there's a still large, big informal economy, rural economy, and then as the previous speaker mentioned, micro, small, and medium enterprises, they are still far away from the reality of the industry for IRR. So in that case, that I do really, I really keen to kind of and welcome new opportunity that technology advancement will bring in terms of transforming the rural economy. Providing a new way to engage that the outreach those who are disadvantaged group in the rural informal economy workers. It's good. However, therefore we need to really think that TVET and skill system need to respond now, that not only to say that sort of the new higher end, the opportunity that IR 4.0 is bringing, but also to try to really go back and then keep working on ongoing challenge of how to respond to the diverse needs of this the disadvantaged group and so on. So that's also the sort of a policy focus of the ILO's work at the moment. And I feel this is very important not to avoid the widening inequality that the technological advancement can bring. And then I think it's an important the point. And then so these are the kind of the idea that is guiding through sort of shaping the ILO's work on the skills and TVET. So it's naturally that we do share a lot of concerns and points that have been already raised by the previous speakers. And then I see that plenty of scope for the collaboration. So we look forward to it. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Akiko. Very, very pertinent points. And like you said, I think we need to dig a little deeper and look forward to continuing conversations with you and teams in ILO. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I'd like to, there are quite a few questions. I think we're going a little over time. So maybe if you bear with us, we'll possibly run over a little bit just to address some of the questions and to come to the last two parts of the agenda. Samir Katiwala has been my co-conspirator for the study. He's been sitting quietly so far. So I'd like him to jump in and take on some of the questions to moderate it with the panelists.
Thank you, Shanti. First, I just kind of wanted to thank Akiko for bringing the point on demand side being as important as the supply side. And this actually has come through in our presentations today, but it's a very key factor. And later, I think when Ayako will intervene later on, I think our work in the region, the ADB's work in the region focuses both on the demand and the supply side, right? And that is what we really think is important. So in terms of the questions, of course, we don't have that much time, as Shanti mentioned. I kind of wanted to group the questions into two broad categories. So one, of course, the study was done before COVID. So a lot of the work that was, done came before the pandemic. So of course, the pandemic has given us new insights into the process of automation, use of labor-saving technology. I kind of wanted to ask Jen, Fraser, and Till, what do you think has happened in the past year in terms of the pandemic? Has it led to more automation? Has it led to more adoption of labor-saving technologies? So it would be great if you could answer those questions. And on the training side, I want to bring in Michael and Sam. Sort of, some of the questions that were raised was about, training, the supply side. Of course, there's always a gap with demand, right? So how do we make sure that the gap doesn't widen? Now, before it was 4IR, now is the COVID-19. How can we make sure that the gap doesn't widen? I think those two sort of broad categories, if you could answer these questions. So we'll start with maybe Jen and Till. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Samir, for that. And that's actually a question that we've been hearing from a lot of people since the pandemic started. And the pandemic has also really fueled a lot more interest in the need for new kinds of skills that workers would need today, and very in such a short space of time in the past year. And in fact, what we have found is that the pandemic and especially in Southeast Asia as well, has really accelerated the rate with which businesses are digitizing their operations just out of just pure need. And a study actually showed that within the past, the first 2 months of the pandemic, the rate of technology adoption that was seen was actually what usually takes place over 5 years. So that was actually a really compelling kind of fact point that really forces us to think about the kinds of skills that workers would require. So back to your question, there was just based off engagements that we've had with industry and also with policymakers, the specific kinds of skills that we see people really require is data security skills being one big part. So it doesn't have to be just the kind of advanced cybersecurity skills, but just having the kind of know-how on how to protect your organizational data, as long as you're managing part of that data as a regular worker. That's really important. And another specific skill that we see on the rise is the need for digital communication and collaboration. So pretty much what we are doing now, it's not just about people who are developing chatbots and all these technologies, but people just generally across the board, including in the education sector, will need to know how to collaborate and communicate with counterparts virtually. So that was two key observations that we found. But happy for Fraser to add on if you have any further.
No, I thought that was a great summary. One thing I'd add is that we are seeing already this gap widening between MSMEs and larger firms, and so there's a lot of sort of good. It's still sort of anecdotal evidence, but seeing that SMEs have often been hit hardest by the pandemic and don't have the resources available to invest. Some of the larger firms who have a bit of a buffer have been able to sort of take advantage of this, accelerate some of the deployment of this. And so, when we think about just firm inequality for a second, I think firm inequality is got a significant risk of increasing out of the pandemic. So overall, we may see this moving forward, this innovation, but starting to look very uneven across different firm sizes.
Yes. Perhaps just to quickly chime in to be able to narrow the gap between supply side and demand side. And I think very importantly to minimize the mismatch because let's say a diploma or a degree would actually take about 3 years or possibly even 4 years. One of the things that we've actually been looking at is actually a AI-based tool whereby we're actually able to look at the demand, almost real-time demand from the market, and then to be able to analyze and analyze these demands and to be able to identify them into different areas. This gives us a head start in terms of being able to then identify and modularize the offerings that that are actually available and very quickly bring forward. I think one of the other things that COVID also helped to teach us along this time is a very quick turnaround in terms of being able to bring content online, whereby traditional content is probably delivered face-to-face. And in this case, new content is very quickly brought online and to be able to be delivered very quickly.
Thank you, Sam. I think since we're on this topic, maybe we go to Michael, and then we'll go to Till after Michael. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Amir. So just to supplement what Samir said, I think when we think about bridging this supply and demand gap, what is really important is that we have good sensing of what industry needs really are. And industry needs will go along with economic strategy, economic growth, as Akiko had mentioned, where the jobs are. And so we do quite a bit of work in terms of industry sensing to identify the relevant skills. Some parts of that is now captured within the skills frameworks that we've published, and I think Samuel shared that earlier. But what we're finding is the skills frameworks take time. Takes time for us to develop a particular skills framework. We need a much more agile mechanism to be able to sense where the skills needs are. And so we have started building a job skills repository that ingests data from multiple data sources, including job postings from job boards and data from other countries, so that we can then use that for sensing where the skills needs are. And then we share that information with the training industry to be able to create that supply. Now, on the demand side, it's about bridging the information gap as well. Advising individuals, advising companies, what are the key skills that are coming up, providing them guidance on where to find these kinds of upskilling opportunities, and the training directory that we maintain Those are important interventions on demand side. Building the mindset awareness of the need for upskilling, that's also demand side interventions. And ultimately our funding model, the way that we ensure co-payment, the way that we ensure there's competition in the marketplace helps to make sure that the demand side interventions are effective. And finally, we measure learning outcomes through all the funded training that we support. And that's how we try to bridge that supply and demand side gap, Samir, that you talked about. Thank you.
And just to complement what everybody said, I think we're finding overwhelmingly that COVID has accelerated digitization, automation. I mentioned it in my presentation, but what is interesting in terms of the matching the demand and supply side is that I think the pandemic has also really transformed our imagination of what is actually possible in terms of organizing work. And so I think some of the ideas around what all of that will look like going forward that would have been considered completely sort of radical and crazy just 2 years ago, I think we've now sort of lived through some of that for the past year. And so I think that is going to be really interesting in terms of, matching people digitally into, sort of into global digital supply chains and other opportunities of that nature.
Thank you, Till. I think one last, maybe we have a few more minutes for one last question, which is around this. There were a lot of questions that were raised around the fact that during the pandemic there has been a disruption to education and training, and of course the shift towards online learning, distance learning, only benefits a subset of workers, with those that have access to connectivity and devices, right? So what do you think, what are we looking at going forward in terms of, given this disruption to training and education, what is the best path forward? I know at the ADB, Shanti knows very well, as does Brajesh and Ayako, that we talk about, sort of we go into a hybrid type learning and education system. So what's your take on this? Maybe we can start with Sam, then go over to Michael, Till, and end with Fraser. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I think even from at this point in time where we're actually delivering content during these times in COVID, there is still no replacement for literally hands-on experience. So at this point in time, it's still very for content that's for learning that's actually very much skill-based. As much of it is being developed, delivered and downloaded from an online perspective, but there is still a need for the students to be able to go back to campus, to be able to go back to do their workshops, and so on and so forth. Of course, some of this things that are actually computer-based, we have been able to deliver this online, but there's still some things like for advanced manufacturing where you're going to do a CNC output. That's something that we are still trying to find ways to be able to deliver this online.
Yes, let me talk a little bit about what we had to do last year, right? Because when the COVID pandemic hit, for public health considerations, we couldn't carry on with the face-to-face training. So our institutes of higher learning did move a lot of the classes online. But for the workforce at large, there were segments of the workforce that were not able to access learning online. And so we had to intervene by providing special programs to allow them to get comfortable with technology, to have access to devices and connectivity, and be able to then access online classes. We actually launched a program we call it Digital Learning Beginner Workshop, which is packaged together with device access, internet access, as well as face-to-face hand-holding workshops, where individuals, they would actually walk through with them how to access online learning. And the results were actually quite encouraging. We had individuals who were not digitally savvy, our mature population as well. After maybe about half a day of hand-holding, they were actually able to access online learning. And then that gave them the confidence to continue to pursue further learning through additional online courses. Now, of course, the courses had to be restructured as well, so that it caters to that particular segment of the workforce. So I think there are ways that we can address that gap. It's not an easy question to address, to tackle, but we have to do that so that the upskilling opportunities remain inclusive.
Just very much echoing what Michael said, I think the future of learning is undoubtedly hybrid. So it's really about taking the best of in-person learning, taking the best of digital learning, and seeing how we can put that together. But the key question is how to do that in a way that will be inclusive and that will be accessible. And so I think we also need to look at the formats of how we deliver that, and then also how sort of that is recognized and accredited and so on. And as long as we take the world's best hybrid learning system, but we keep it in a very sort of rigid structure, perhaps, of how we've traditionally organized education, I think that sort of will not be enough. I think we also need to look at how we're sort of putting all of that together as an overall system.
Look, yeah, it's a great summary from everyone else. The only thing I want to add is that we often talk about the need for vertical versus horizontal skills, and just echo that we shouldn't forget about some of those horizontal skills. So problem solving, critical thinking, these are always still going to be key, and it's that combination which makes it so hard, right? Of the best worker in the future is going to have that wonderful mix between deep, relevant vertical knowledge that they're keeping pace with changes, but also that horizontal knowledge around critical thinking and so forth, and project management that enables them to adapt those. So I think getting that balance right will be particularly crucial going forward.
Thank you, Fraser. Thank you, Samir. On that note, shall we? I know that there's still a few more questions, but we're already out of time, and we still would like to not close this meeting before hearing a couple of people. I'd like to invite Ayako Inagaki, who is the director of the Southeast Asia Department, the Human and Social Development Division, to share her thoughts on what the study means for ADB operations in the future. She's really given us a lot of time during the course of the study, and she leads the planning and implementation of ADB operations in education, skills, health, and social protection in the whole region. So I would like to hear her thoughts. Over to you, Ayako.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shanti. And then I found this panel to be so interesting and so insightful that we can just probably keep on talking forever. And what I would like to do really is turn this talking and an insight to our operation. And this is exactly what we are going to do, and we're doing it already. Just maybe a few insights from my side. What you're talking about, the gap between the supply and the demand, probably not even before the COVID and before even talking about Industry 4.0, this is a problem that our developing member countries have been struggling for years and years. So this is not new. It's simply that it has become so urgent. And the good thing about when we're doing policy dialogue with our government counterpart and even private sector stakeholders is that at least there is awareness of this urgency of that they have to do something about that. Now, what's the solutions? And the solutions are really coming from the insights that you are bringing today. This ASEAN study is an extremely important analysis that we really wanted to do based on the previous, flagship annual publication that ADB does in 2018, which is the Asian Development Outlook, how technology affects jobs. So this ASEAN study really wanted to focus on these 4 ASEAN countries, focusing on the implication of Industry 4.0 and implications on jobs and skills and education and training on 2 most, well, not most, but strategically important economic sectors. So this is a very important piece of work for the Southeast Asia regional departments to translate the analysis of these studies into our operation. And by the way, I think I like very much, I think what Till was saying, this is, we want to bring a reskilling revolutions, and this is perhaps what we're really looking forward to see in our regions. So this finding of the study is important because it feeds into the directional an analytical framework to design project and program on human capital development that are most responsive for our developing member countries. The good thing is that if we look at each of the countries, what we may call a 5 years country partnership strategy, human capital development, and particularly on preparing the workforce for the digital economy in the Industry 4.0 era, places a major focus and is a major pillar. So that's really what demands also coming from our clients. So the implication of this piece of knowledge piece, it's multiple. First is that it confirms or substantiates for us the increased lending in human capital development in this critical area, and that's increased resources for investment are supplemented by the focused knowledge work that we have seen today. Second, the study really contributes to direct the nature of the focus of AD operation to some of the recommendation of this study. And I'll invite, some critics also that perhaps our approach are not revolutionary enough or proactive enough, and I'll take it also. Anyway, just to give you some example. So a good example is Cambodia, where the study has paved the way to preparing a long-term skills development roadmap for Cambodia, and followed by investment loan that focus on skills for future. This industry transformation maps are really taking some of the insight expertise that are coming from the Singaporean experience, as really much of the kind that Singapore has undertaken. So that will be the Cambodian government is very keen to pursue, I think, in two economic sectors. We also, in parallel, Cambodia has its renewed focus on STEM education and digital skills for a long-term roadmap to develop secondary educations as well. In Indonesia, the study has contributed to the design of a new program on human capital development. As part of this program, we're also supporting teacher training initiative that leverages digital technology to enhance the capacity of teachers, the teachers' professional development in Indonesia. The country report in Indonesia, a part of this work that Fraser and Jem did, highlighted the need to leverage technology in enhancing capacity of school teachers and educators. So we really took it right hands to our counterpart here. Similarly, in a project on advanced skills with higher education institution in Indonesia, the curriculum and courses on automation and artificial intelligence will be provided. We talk about lifelong learning, and perhaps maybe not so much today, but the importance of broadening options for students, whether courses are coming domestically or from the foreign university, to increase also competitiveness and the skills of the students to get a much higher order skills that is necessary for the digital economy. So we're working closely with the Indonesian Cyber Education Institute to design a digital marketplace for online courses for both Indonesian and foreign university. And this effort also includes the digital credential effort using a blockchain technology. One more example, two more examples. In the Philippines, the study has helped us with a new investment project in Tibet. We're working with TESTA in redesigning the courses and program to integrate the Industry 4.0 relevant skills. Skills Future Singapore has been working with ADB and TESTA in this effort. So really looking forward to have this project designed and implemented. Finally, in Vietnam, there is initial discussion also have started on the follow-on knowledge support to develop industry transformations map based on the finding of this study. So for me, the implication of education and training include not just developing new courses for emerging occupation, but also upgrade existing courses, provide opportunities for upskilling, reskilling of the workers, and obviously, as we say today, may lose job or needs urgent reskilling to adjust to the new task that is coming in the new job coming up. Now, lastly, just to mention, we're currently also implementing technical assistance on education technology in Cambodia, Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. This technical assistance are built on this knowledge work done in this country, as highlighted in the Alpha Beta team work. For this EdTech technology technical assistance, we examine what works best given the country context. How has the evidence changed considering the impact of COVID-19? We're testing different technology solutions in cooperation with different education technology company to see what has the most impact in terms of the improving learning outcome or the employability of the youth as well as the adult. So as we're moving forward in designing the project and program, this will generate demand for more knowledge work, more targeted knowledge work, and that we will build upon this ADB study. And finally, from my side, as we value the partnership that we have forged with all of you here, experts, we will obviously invite all of you to join this exciting journey towards, once again, this creating this reskilling revolution, as Till mentioned. So thank you, Shanti. And I think with this, let me hand it over to my colleague, Brajesh, Chief of the Education Sector Group, for his concluding remarks as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayako, for your reflection on how we are incorporating the findings. Let me thank all of you for joining this webinar today. The disruptions to education and training systems caused by COVID-19 have been monumental. This is also a wake-up call, but the silver lining from this pandemic is the opportunity to rethink and reimagine education and training systems for a new normal, which will be increasingly impacted by digitalization. In this context, DG Ramesh also emphasized the need to draw on the rich lessons learned and emerging good practices to blend knowledge with ADB's operations. I'd like to thank the speakers particularly for their excellent presentations. These have profound implications on education and training systems as part of the new normal, some of which we have highlighted in ADB's recently published guidance note. My colleague Ayako just highlighted how ADB is reflecting the implications of the ASEAN IR4 study findings in its operation in Southeast Asia. We are also replicating this study in the central and western region of ADB with Fraser and Jen. Let me highlight my 4 key takeaways from today's webinar. First, digitalization is one of the mega trends, which is happening fast. The pace is accelerating due to COVID-19. This has huge implications on education and training as part of the new normal. Digital skills and soft skills are integral parts of foundational learning across all levels of education and as part of upskilling and reskilling the workforce. In order to better prepare for this, the capacity of teachers and trainers has to be systematically enhanced at scale, since skills for new jobs are different from the old ones, as noted by Till. And we need to identify strategic partners to support our development member countries in their digitalization journey. Again, we have highlighted some of this in the guidance note. Under immediate recovery and rejuvenation phases. Second, we need to look more closely on how to prepare learners for quality jobs and enhance opportunities for female workforce from the lens of digital transformation and commensurate support needed. Here, the modality like STEAM education, as my colleague Ayako also pointed out, carries a huge potential in blending inquiry-based and experiential learning that is even more important in dealing with disruptive technologies in an uncertain world. We just had a virtual study visit on the city of Turku in Finland to look at the STEAM program. This is one of the best I've seen that takes a whole of government approach in close collaboration with relevant companies. Another really good example we heard today is about Skills Future from Michael. Third, it is important to take an ecosystem and whole of government approach to 4IR skills. Sam referred to SIRI or Smart Industry Readiness Index, which is the kind of diagnostic tool that is important for countries to have clarity on the readiness of their industries. This helps to develop roadmaps that aggregate demand and supply at the macro level to systematically prepare the workforce. We are now discussing with colleagues responsible for SIRI at the World Economic Forum on how we could partner to support interested developing member countries. And fourth, how to strengthen education and training institutions and their teachers and trainers will have significant impact on improving the quality and relevance of the education and training systems. This will require rethinking from at least two perspectives in terms of defining the role of universities and specialized institutions on how they collaborate with industries to support research and education and training, but also, as Akiko pointed out, there aren't enough jobs, so also preparing for entrepreneurship. This also needs to look at using EdTech solutions to scale up training and equity, and rethinking formal schooling, TVET, and higher education, and balancing with workforce reskilling and upskilling, given the increased longevity of the workforce, along with changing nature of skills and jobs. This will require developing real-time labor market intelligence system, as again, Teal pointed out, and linking it with individual skills profiles of job seekers or workers and training providers, something similar to what the Skills Future is doing to address the nagging problem of skills mismatches. We are particularly delighted to have Singapore Polytechnic with us today. As Santi pointed out, we're implementing a 6-part webinar series to raise awareness of 4IR and its implication for skills training with our member countries. It's also great to meet Till Leopold from World Economic Forum, and to welcome Michael, Sam, and Akiko. A big thank you to all of you once again for joining us today, and I very much hope that we can continue our discussions and find opportunities to collaborate in the future. Thank you very much. Back to you, Santi.
Thank you, Brajesh. Thank you, Ayako. I think we overran the time quite a bit, but it was such a rich discussion. I think there are plenty of takeaways, and there's certainly a lot of room for continuing the dialogue and the collaborations. Like Brajesh mentioned, the partnerships to help the digital journey and the transformation at the country level will be the next step. And so we will be in touch with you. So watch the space for more. Thank you so much, and have a great day, everyone. And I'm sorry we couldn't respond to all the questions, but we tried our best. And please write to us and we can try to respond to you offline. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.